review with you our lab equipment notes. Today's objective is I can describe and identify different pieces of lab equipment. So before we begin our notes today, please make sure that you do have your Cornell notes and that you have reviewed how to take Cornell notes in my classroom. If you need a refresher, please go back and re-watch that video on how to take Cornell notes. Alright? Don't forget to put your name at the top, the date, your period, and also remember here's the page number. Alright, so if you need help on taking Cornell notes, please go back and watch the video on how to take Cornell notes. Alright, so today as we go through our notes, I'm going to pause and go through and show you some pictures of the objects that we are looking at today. Some of them you might recognize, some of them you might not. Alright, so our first main idea today is lab equipment. What is it used for? Lab equipment is used during an experiment. It is important for you to know that you are not to eat or drink out of any piece of equipment at any time. Chemicals can be left behind from previous experiments and get into your body and harm you. Please, please do not eat or drink out of any piece of lab equipment. Each piece of lab equipment has its own purpose and must be used for that purpose. For example, you would not stir with a thermometer, you would use a stirring rod. If you need to finish copying something down, please go ahead and hit pause now and then restart it when you're done. Alright, so we're going to go through 11 basic pieces of equipment, and so these are what pieces of lab equipment you might see in class. So there are 11 of them. The first is microscopes. The second is slides. Third is test tubes. Fourth is petri dishes. 5 is dyes and other indicators. 6 is beakers. 7 is called flask or Erlenmeyer flasks. I'll show you how to spell the word Erlenmeyer later if you would like. Hot plates, graduated cylinders, pipettes, and scales. So, if you need a moment to catch up, pause the video now. I am going to go ahead and move on. Your first piece of equipment, microscopes. The prefix micro means small. Microscopes allow us to see objects that are too small for the human eye to see, like cells. And if we come down here, here is a picture, or pictures, of microscopes. So you may have seen these before. I'm hoping to get to these second 9 weeks. Kind of excited about it. So these are microscopes. Close that out for our next picture. Slides, or microscope slides, if you would like to be a little bit more specific, are small rectangular pieces of glass that are used with microscopes. They can be pre-made or we can make them ourselves. And they contain very small specimens that you cannot see with your eyes. So if we look over here, here are some examples of slides that you would use to make your own. Like here's a person dropping, looks like maybe some pond water onto there. And if we look here, here are some that are pre-made that I could buy from like a source and use instead of making my own. If you need a moment, go ahead and pause here so you can go ahead and finish writing about microscopes and slides. Test tubes. Test tubes are these little glass cylinder tubes used for small reactions. They can be used in a centrifuge, which is a machine that spins really fast, and it needs to sit in a test tube rack due to its rounded bottom. So these test tubes are little cylinders, they have a rounded bottom, and they need to sit in something called a test tube rack. So if we look at these, for example, here, these are all rounded bottoms here, alright, but in order for them to stand up in real life, you need this thing called a test tube rack. They are usually wooden, sometimes they can be plastic. So this is a test tube, and this would be a test tube rack. variety. Okay. Petri dishes are used to grow bacteria or small amounts of moss. They are circular shape with a lid, and if we're using them to grow bacteria, they usually need to be placed in an incubator to grow that substance. So here is a petri dish. These are all petri dishes, and here's where they grew some kind of bacteria inside them. Okay, now I'm ready to move on. If you need to pause to finish up writing about test tubes or petri dishes, please do so now. Alright, our next part is kind of two things smushed together as one. We have dyes and other indicators. Dyes are used to color cells to make it easier to see certain structures. Dyes can also turn invisible substances visible. For example, we cannot see the starch in a potato until we use iodine. So, adding starch to a potato allows us, adding iodine to a potato allows us to see that starch within the potato. Indicators are used to determine chemical characteristics such as acidity and composition. So indicators tell you what something is made of. A common example of an indicator is litmus paper. It turns red if the substance is acidic or blue if it is basic. So let me come here. Let me find the one I liked from earlier here. Okay. So if you look here, these are pieces of paper letting you know, it's an indicator telling you how basic or acidic it is. And I believe it says that this is cabbage indicator. It's a different type. It's not litmus paper, so it's not turning just red or blue. But you'll see there's a red rainbow. There's a bunch of different indicators for pH testing. But here is an example of how the indicators change and at what level they are. And we'll talk about that when we get into properties of water and acids and bases. If you need to take a moment, go ahead and pause the video so that you can catch up on writing about dyes and other indicators. The next piece of lab equipment that we're going to talk about are called beakers. They are cylinder in shape glasses used to mix solutions. The solutions are often poured into another container, and they are not used for accurate measurement of liquid. So if you're going to measure something, you're not going to use a beaker unless it specifically tells you to, but there's another piece of equipment that I would like for you to use to measure water. Okay. Here's what a beaker looks like. You can tell it has markings on it for water. Alright. There's a 15 milliliter beaker. They can go up pretty large, just depending on what size you use. A flask, or better known as an Erlenmeyer flask, and I'll point out where that word is in a second, the word Erlenmeyer. They have a narrow neck and are used with solutions that may splash or may need to be plugged with a stopper at some point. So this is an Erlenmeyer flask. If you would like to jot down that word Erlenmeyer, here it is, up here at the top, Erlenmeyer. And notice here that the neck is tapered, so it prevents that splashing if you were to boil something. And notice that if we enlarge this, it does have an opening that we could put something in, a stopper, to basically plug it up and keep it safe and stored if we need to. Alright, go ahead and take a moment and pause if you need to before moving on to the next slide. The next piece of equipment that we're going to use might see or use in the lab is called a hot plate. It is used to heat items in beakers or flasks, and it may contain a magnet so that items in it can be stirred when a stir bar is added. So a stir bar is a small cylinder type thing, and you just slip it in, and it has a magnet in the middle, and it stirs it. Here is a hot plate. Here is one that has the option of heating and stirring. You can do both at the same time. I can show you what a stir bar is. So these pill-like shaped things are stir bars, and they have different weights and different sizes as well. So those are stir bars that you use with the hot plate to stir items. A graduated cylinder. It's a tall cylinder that is measured in milliliters, or ml, used for measuring large amount of liquids accurately. So if I were to ask you to measure something accurately, I would ask you to use a graduated cylinder. Okay, that is what you use, and this is an example. That's one example. And here's one with various sizes. And here's another with an assist to help you read the level, so that moves up and down to help you make sure you're measuring correctly. They might also be white, like in that picture up there. Alright, moving on from graduated cylinders. Moving on to pipettes. So pipettes are used for measuring very small amounts of liquid, and they can be plastic and disposable, or can be designed to reuse. So for example, these are like plastic disposable ones, and here's an example of one that you would reuse. You would not throw these away. I did not see one like this until I was in college. I think we have one of these in our classroom. It's also a reusable one, and again, these are for measuring very small amounts of liquid, so you can measure them accurately. Alright, go ahead and pause if you need to before moving on to the next slide, our last slide for today. And the last piece of equipment that we're going to be talking about today is a scale. Scales are used to measure out certain weights. Most are electronic now. So if you need a visual representation of what a scale would look like in our science classroom, here are a couple. This one has a box around it to keep the air from messing with the measurements. This one's a triple beam balance. There's a bunch of different types, but most likely you'll be dealing with an electronic scale. Are there more pieces of lab equipment? Yes, there are. These are just a few examples of some of the basic types of lab equipment. When we use lab equipment, it will be reviewed in class prior or before being used. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. If you need to, please go back, rewatch it, pause it, finish up your notes. Don't forget to write your summary. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me through my email or remind or ask me before or after class. I hope you guys have a great day or night, and I'll see you guys in class. Have a great day. Bye.